The clock on Judge Marcus Chen's dashboard showed 9:45 p.m. as he drove through the quiet streets of Oak Hill Heights. After 12 hours at the courthouse handling a difficult murder trial, all he wanted was to get home to his wife and kids. The streetlights cast long shadows across his black BMW, and the fall air was crisp enough to make him glad he'd remembered his coat that morning. He wasn't speeding. He never did. As a Superior Court judge for the past 8 years, Marcus knew better than most how important it was to follow the rules. That's why he was surprised when red and blue lights suddenly flashed in his rearview mirror. "Great," he muttered to himself, pulling over carefully to the curb. He'd done this routine countless times from the other side of the bench, hearing police officers testify about traffic stops. Now here he was, about to experience one himself. Marcus did everything by the book. He turned off the engine, placed his hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, and waited. In the mirror, he could see 2 officers approaching, one on each side of his car. Something about their posture made him uneasy. The beam of a flashlight hit his face. "Roll down your window," the officer on the driver's side barked. His name tag read Officer Peterson. Marcus pressed the button, lowering the window. "Good evening, officer," he said calmly. "May I ask why you pulled me over?" Instead of answering, Peterson shined the light around the car's interior. "Let me see your license and registration." "Of course," Marcus replied. "I'm going to reach for my wallet now. It's in my back pocket." He announced his movements clearly, just as he'd advised his own children to do if they were ever stopped by police. "Just hurry up," Peterson snapped. As Marcus reached for his wallet, the second officer, Officer Bryant, according to his tag, suddenly tensed up. "Keep your hands where we can see them," Bryant shouted, his hand moving to his gun. "I'm complying with Officer Peterson's request for my ID," Marcus explained patiently. "I'm also a Superior Court judge, if you'd like to verify." "Sure you are," Peterson cut him off with a sneer. "And I'm the president. Get out of the car, now." Marcus felt his heart rate quicken, but he kept his voice steady. "Officers, there seems to be a misunderstanding. If you'll allow me to show you my credentials." Before he could finish, his door was yanked open. Rough hands grabbed his arm, pulling him out of the car. "He's resisting," Bryant yelled, though Marcus was doing nothing of the sort. "I am not resisting," Marcus stated firmly. "This is an unlawful." His face hit the cold metal of his car hood. The impact knocked his glasses off, sending them skittering across the pavement. He could feel handcuffs being slapped onto his wrists, tight enough to hurt. "We got a report of a suspicious vehicle in the area," Peterson said, his knee pressing into Marcus's back. "Driver matched your description." Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity. He'd lived in this neighborhood for 10 years. He was wearing a $1,000 suit. What description would that be exactly? Neither officer answered, but Marcus knew. He'd seen it hundreds of times in his courtroom, the subtle and not-so-subtle ways racism played out in the justice system. He just never expected to experience it quite so personally. Nearby porch lights were starting to come on. Neighbors were watching. Marcus could see Mrs. Rodriguez from across the street recording with her phone. Good, there would be evidence. "You're making a serious mistake," he said quietly as they pulled him up. "I want your badge numbers, and I want to speak to your supervisor." "Oh, you'll get to make all the complaints you want?" Peterson laughed. "Right after we process you downtown." As they pushed him into the back of their patrol car, Marcus caught a glimpse of his reflection in the window. His tie was crooked, there was a small cut on his cheek, and his normally neat hair was messed up. But his eyes were clear and determined. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about every person who'd ever sat in his courtroom claiming police bias, every case where he'd given officers the benefit of the doubt. Through the car window, you could see more neighbors gathering, more phones recording. The truth would come out, and when it did, these officers would learn that they'd picked the wrong person to profile. Because Marcus Chen didn't just know the law, he'd spent his entire career serving it. And now he would use that knowledge to ensure justice was served, not just for himself, but for everyone who'd ever been in this position but lacked the power to fight back. The news of Judge Marcus Chen's arrest spread faster than wildfire in the digital age. By sunrise, shaky cell phone videos of the incident were all over social media. His wife Sarah, who had spent a sleepless night trying to get him released, watched one of the videos on her phone while sitting in the police station's waiting area. Her hands shook with anger as she heard the officers' harsh voices and saw her husband's face pressed against the car. "Mrs. Chen," a young desk sergeant approached her. "Your husband's being processed out now." Minutes later, Marcus walked through a heavy metal door. His suit was wrinkled, his tie was missing, and a small bandage covered the cut on his cheek. Sarah rushed to hug him, careful to avoid touching his injured face. "The kids?" he asked quietly. "They're with my sister," Sarah replied. "They don't know yet." Marcus nodded, then turned as his colleague, District Attorney James Thompson, walked in. Thompson's usual cheerful expression was replaced by one of barely contained fury. "I came as soon as I heard," Thompson said, shaking Marcus's hand. "The body cam footage just landed on my desk. It's worse than the cell phone videos, Marcus. Way worse." Outside the police station, a small crowd of reporters had gathered. Camera flashes burst like lightning as Marcus emerged. He stood straight and dignified despite his disheveled appearance, years of courtroom experience helping him maintain his composure. "Judge Chen, what happened last night? Were the officers racist? Will you be pressing charges?" Marcus raised his hand for silence, and the reporters quieted down, a habit from his courtroom carrying over. "I will be holding a press conference at 2 p.m. today. For now, I will say only this. What happened to me last night happens to countless citizens who don't have my resources or platform. That ends now." Back at home, Marcus sat in his study, watching the body camera footage Thompson had sent him. The video showed everything: the officers' aggressive approach, their dismissal of his identification, the unnecessary force. But it also caught something the cell phone videos hadn't: the radio call that started it all. "Be on lookout for suspicious male in black luxury vehicle," the dispatcher's voice crackled. "Resident reported unfamiliar person in neighborhood." Marcus paused the video and leaned back in his chair. He'd lived in this neighborhood for a decade. He knew every neighbor, sat on the community board, hosted the annual block party in his backyard. Someone had reported him as suspicious simply because of how he looked. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing since morning. Fellow judges, lawyers, civil rights activists, reporters, everyone wanted to talk to him. But the message that caught his attention came from an unexpected source. Officer Lisa Martinez from the same police department. "Judge Chen," the message read, "what happened to you was wrong. There's more going on in this department than you know. If you're willing to listen, I have information." A knock on his study door interrupted his thoughts. His 13-year-old son Michael stood there, holding his tablet. "Dad, you're all over TikTok." Marcus waved his son over. The boy had clearly been crying but was trying to hide it. "Come here, buddy." Michael walked over and showed him the screen. The video of his arrest had millions of views already. The comments ranged from outrage to calls for action. "Are you okay?" Michael asked quietly. "I am," Marcus assured him, pulling him close. "And something good is going to come from this. Sometimes bad things happen to show us what needs to be fixed." His phone buzzed again, Thompson calling with updates. The two officers had been placed on administrative leave. Internal Affairs was opening an investigation. The police chief wanted to meet privately to discuss the situation. Marcus looked at his reflection in his study window. The cut on his face would heal, but the impact of last night would leave a different kind of mark, one that could potentially change things for the better. He thought about Officer Martinez's message, about all the cases he presided over through the years, about his son watching the video of his arrest. "It's time," he said to himself, reaching for his phone to respond to Martinez. The truth needed to come out, all of it, and Marcus Chen was just the person to make sure it did. The Internal Affairs conference room felt colder than usual to Officer Lisa Martinez as she watched the police chief defend Officers Peterson and Bryant on TV. She clutched a thick folder in her hands, evidence she'd collected over 2 years of similar incidents that had been swept under the rug. "Our officers followed standard procedure," Chief Wilson was saying to the reporters. "While we regret any discomfort Judge Chen experienced, initial reviews suggest." The TV clicked off. Captain Rogers of Internal Affairs sat across from Martinez, his face unreadable. "You understand what you're doing here, Officer Martinez? The risks?" "I do, sir," she replied firmly. "And I can't stay quiet anymore. What happened to Judge Chen wasn't a one-time incident. It's a pattern." Meanwhile, across town, Marcus Chen sat in his home office with District Attorney Thompson and his personal lawyer, Rachel Kim. The folder Martinez had sent him lay open on his desk, revealing dozens of similar complaints that had been filed and dismissed over the past 2 years. "Look at this," Rachel said, pointing to a document. "Last March, a black pediatrician was stopped 3 times in 1 week, each time by Peterson or Bryant. No citations issued, just harassment." Thompson picked up another report. And here, a Latino college professor. They claimed he matched a robbery suspect's description in his own driveway. Marcus rubbed his temples. The cut on his face had healed, but a new kind of pain was growing, the pain of realizing how deep this problem went. "They thought they were untouchable," he said quietly. "That's why they didn't even hesitate to treat a judge this way. They've been getting away with it for so long." His phone buzzed, a text from Officer Martinez. "Chief Wilson is planning to close the investigation by Friday. They're going to claim insufficient evidence of bias. We need to move fast." Rachel looked over the legal strategy she'd prepared. "We have enough for a civil rights lawsuit, but that's not enough. We need criminal charges. These officers need to face real consequences." "And they will," Thompson assured them. "But we need to be smart about this. The police union's already pushing back hard. They're trying to paint Martinez as a disgruntled employee." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah came in with a local newspaper. The headline read, "Police Department Defends Officers. Claims Judge Chen was argumentative and uncooperative." Marcus laughed without humor. "They're really going with that, when there's video evidence." "They're scared," Rachel observed. "They know this isn't just about one incident anymore. Martinez's evidence shows systematic discrimination. If this gets out—" "When," Marcus corrected her. "When this gets out. The question is how to do it in a way they can't ignore or dismiss." His computer chimed with an email. It was from Mrs. Rodriguez, his neighbor who had recorded the arrest. "Judge Chen," it read, "I've been talking to other neighbors. We found more incidents. People who were too afraid to report. We want to help." Thompson leaned forward. "That's it. We need to show this isn't just about police versus citizens. It's about the community standing up and saying enough." Marcus nodded slowly, a plan forming in his mind. "Set up a meeting with Martinez and contact every person in these files. It's time to show the department that they can't brush this under the rug anymore." Sarah squeezed his shoulder. "They'll fight back hard," she warned. "Let them," Marcus replied, his voice firm. "Because this time, we have something they don't expect, the truth, and we have people brave enough to tell it." As if on cue, his phone buzzed again. More officers were coming forward, inspired by Martinez's courage. The wall of silence was cracking. Looking out his window at the peaceful neighborhood street where he'd been arrested, Marcus felt a mix of determination and hope. The department thought they could control this story, bury the evidence, and silence the witnesses. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had attacked someone who knew exactly how to fight back. And he wasn't fighting just for himself anymore. He was fighting for every person in those files, every victim of prejudice who had never gotten justice. The real investigation was just beginning. The community center was packed. People stood along the walls, sat on the floor, and spilled out into the hallway. Marcus Chen stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces. Some he recognized from the case files Martinez had shared. Others were his neighbors, fellow judges, and community leaders. All of them were here for one reason: change. 3 weeks ago, Marcus began, his voice steady. "I was arrested outside my own home, but my story isn't unique. It's not even rare." He gestured to the people seated behind him on the stage. "These brave individuals are here to share their stories. Stories that the police department tried to bury." Dr. James Wilson, the pediatrician who'd been stopped 3 times in 1 week, spoke first. His hand shook as he held his notes, but his voice was clear. "I save children's lives for a living," he said. "But to Officers Peterson and Bryant, I was just another suspicious person in a nice car." From the back of the room, someone shouted, "Where are the officers now? Why aren't they here to face us?" "They were invited," Marcus replied, "along with Chief Wilson and the entire command staff. Their empty seats speak volumes." But not all police seats were empty. Officer Martinez sat in the front row, along with 6 other officers who had come forward. They wore civilian clothes, but everyone knew who they were. Their presence sent a powerful message. Not all police supported what was happening. Local news cameras recorded everything. Social media live streams ensured that nothing could be hidden or twisted. As person after person shared their stories, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Professor Rodriguez stopped in his own driveway. Sarah Chen, a high school teacher, followed through 3 stores by Officer Bryant, who claimed she looked suspicious. Reverend Thomas, made to lie on the ground while taking his evening walk. In the middle of the meeting, Marcus's phone buzzed. It was a message from Thompson. Police union just called an emergency press conference, but trying to get ahead of this. Marcus smiled slightly. Let them try. The truth was already out there, spreading faster than any press conference could contain it. Some people ask why I didn't just file a quiet complaint. Marcus continued, addressing the crowd again. Why make this public? Why cause trouble? He paused, looking at his son Michael in the front row. Because our children are watching. Because silence solves nothing. Because every person in this room deserves better. Suddenly, the back doors opened. Chief Wilson walked in, followed by several command staff members. The room went quiet. The chief looked uncomfortable but determined as he made his way to the front. Judge Chen, he said, his voice carrying in the silent room. May I speak? Marcus nodded, stepping aside from the podium. This wasn't part of the plan, but sometimes the best moments weren't planned. I've been chief for 15 years, Wilson began. And I've always said we serve all citizens equally. He paused, looking around the room. But after watching these testimonies, after reading Officer Martinez's evidence, after seeing how my department handled Judge Chen's arrest, I can't say that anymore. A murmur ran through the crowd. Martinez sat up straighter. This was unexpected. Effective immediately, Wilson continued, I'm announcing a complete review of all complaints filed in the past 5 years. Officers Peterson and Bryant are suspended without pay pending criminal investigation. And, he took a deep breath, I'm establishing the Civilian Oversight Committee with full access to department records. The room erupted. People stood, cheered, hugged each other. But Marcus noticed something else. The other officers who had come forward were crying. Years of carrying the weight of silence, of watching injustice and feeling helpless to stop it, were finally ending. As the meeting concluded, reporters rushed to interview the chief. But Marcus's attention was on Michael, who was looking at him with pride. You did it, Dad, he said. No, Marcus corrected him, putting an arm around his son's shoulders. We did it. All of us. And this is just the beginning. Outside, the sun was setting on their neighborhood. But for the first time in weeks, it felt like dawn. The courthouse felt different to Marcus Chen now. For 15 years, he had walked these halls as a judge, commanding respect with his black robes and position. Today, he sat on the other side of the system, wearing a gray suit and sitting at the plaintiff's table while another judge presided over his civil rights case. All rise, the bailiff called out. The Honorable Judge Patricia Martinez presiding. Marcus stood with his lawyer, Rachel Kim, as Judge Martinez entered. The courtroom was packed. On one side sat Officer Lisa Martinez, no relation to the judge, and the other whistleblower officers. On the other side, Officers Peterson and Bryant sat with their union lawyers, their faces tense. Your Honor, Rachel began after everyone was seated. We're here today not just because of one incident, but because of a pattern of discrimination that has gone unchecked for years. She placed a stack of files on the evidence table. We have documented 47 similar incidents in the past 2 years alone. 47 citizens harassed, humiliated, and violated because of the color of their skin. The defense lawyer stood up quickly. Objection, Your Honor. These other alleged incidents are not relevant to Judge Chen's case. Overruled. Judge Martinez replied firmly. The pattern of behavior is central to establishing the civil rights violations claimed in this suit. As Rachel presented the evidence, Marcus watched the jury. They were a diverse group. Teachers, office workers, retirees. Several took notes as Officer Lisa Martinez testified about the department's unwritten rules and hidden practices. We were told to focus on suspicious vehicles in upscale neighborhoods, she explained. But suspicious always seemed to mean the same thing. Any person of color driving a nice car or walking in a wealthy area. Peterson and Bryant shifted uncomfortably in their seats as body camera footage from multiple incidents played on the courtroom screens. Their own voices, filled with prejudice and aggression, echoed through the room. During a break, Marcus stepped into the hallway for water. He found Michael sitting on a bench, still in his school uniform. "Shouldn't you be in class?" Marcus asked. "Mom said I could come," Michael replied. "I wanted to see you fight for what's right." Marcus sat beside his son. "You know, when I became a judge, I thought I understood our justice system completely. But sometimes you have to step outside something to see it clearly." Back in the courtroom, the defense tried to paint Marcus as aggressive during the arrest, but the videos told a different story. They tried to justify the officer's actions based on the suspicious person report, but that backfired when Rachel revealed that the caller had specifically mentioned race as the only reason for suspicion. "Your Honor," Rachel said, standing for her closing argument, "this case isn't just about compensating Judge Chen for his mistreatment. It's about acknowledging a broken system and taking steps to fix it." She walked closer to the jury. "The evidence shows that these officers didn't make a mistake. They followed a deliberate pattern of discrimination, a pattern that hurt not just my client, but dozens of other citizens. A pattern that brave officers like Lisa Martinez risked their careers to expose." The defense lawyer argued that the officers were just doing their jobs, following protocol, but his words sounded hollow after all the evidence presented. As the jury left to deliberate, Marcus felt strangely calm. Whatever the verdict, the truth was now public record. The department's practices were exposed. Change was already happening. "Dad," Michael whispered, "what happens if we lose?" Marcus looked at his son thoughtfully. "We've already won something important, Michael. We showed that no one is above the law, and no one is below it either. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect." The bailiff appeared at the door. "The jury has reached a verdict." As everyone returned to their seats, Marcus caught Officer Lisa Martinez's eye. She gave him a small nod. Win or lose, they had started something that couldn't be stopped. The real victory wasn't just about one case or one verdict. It was about changing the system itself, one truth at a time. The silence in the courtroom was heavy as the jury foreperson stood. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, feel the tension in every breath around him. His wife Sarah squeezed his hand under the table. "On the charge of civil rights violations against Judge Marcus Chen, we find the defendants, Officers James Peterson and Robert Bryant, guilty." A wave of whispers swept through the courtroom. Marcus remained still, his face calm, even as Sarah's grip tightened. "On the charge of filing false police reports, we find the defendants, guilty." Officer Lisa Martinez, sitting in the front row, closed her eyes in relief. The other whistleblower officers nodded quietly. "On the charge of racial discrimination under color of law, we find the defendants, guilty." Peterson's face turned red. Bryant stared at the floor. The union lawyers quickly started writing notes, probably already planning their appeal. Judge Patricia Martinez addressed the jury. "Thank you for your service. This court will reconvene tomorrow morning for sentencing." She banged her gavel, and the room erupted into movement and voices. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded around Marcus. Camera lights flashed as he stepped up to the microphones. "Today's verdict isn't about revenge," he began, his voice steady. "It's about accountability. No badge should be a shield for bigotry. No uniform should be an excuse for abuse of power." As he spoke, he noticed more people gathering, not just reporters, but ordinary citizens. Many were holding signs. "Justice for all," and "End police racism." They had been standing outside the courthouse every day of the trial. Later that evening, Marcus sat in his home office with District. 6 months after the verdict, Marcus Chen stood in front of the newly renovated police training center. The sign above the entrance read, "Community First Police Academy, where service meets justice." As chairman of the Police Reform Committee, he had helped design the new training program that every officer, old and new, would have to complete. Inside the main training room, Officer Lisa Martinez was leading a session. Pictures of real cases, including Marcus's arrest, covered one wall. On another wall hung the department's new motto, "Protect, Serve, Respect." These aren't just stories, Lisa was telling a group of officers. These are real people whose lives were changed by police bias. Today, we're going to learn how to recognize our own bias. 1 year had passed since that night when Marcus Chen was arrested outside his home. Now, he stood on a stage in Washington, D.C., looking out at a sea of faces, police chiefs, community leaders, and politicians from across the country. Change isn't easy, Marcus began, his voice carrying through the quiet hall. A year ago, I was angry. I wanted justice. But what I discovered was something bigger than just my case. I found a broken system that needed fixing, and brave people willing to fix it. In the front row sat Officer Lisa Martinez, now promoted to captain and head of the new Police Ethics Division. Next to her was Mrs. Rodriguez, who had become a national speaker on community oversight. Chief Wilson sat with them, his department now a model for police reform across the country. Today, I'm not here to talk about what went wrong, Marcus continued. I'm here to show you what went right, how one department transformed itself from the inside out. He clicked through slides showing the results. Civilian complaints down by 80%. Use of force incidents reduced by 75%. Community trust ratings up by 90%. But more importantly, he showed pictures of real change. Officers playing basketball with kids. Community meetings where people actually smiled. Training sessions where honest conversations happened. In the middle of his presentation, Marcus paused at a particular photo. It showed Michael, now 14, giving a tour of the police station to his school class. The students were a mix of all races, and they were talking and laughing with officers who looked just like them. This is what success looks like, Marcus said, pointing to the photo. Not just statistics, but real human connections. Not just following rules, but changing hearts. After the speech, during the reception, people lined up to talk to him. A police chief from Texas wanted to implement their training program. A community leader from Chicago asked about starting a similar oversight board. A senator wanted to discuss making these reforms federal law. Marcus's phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah with a video clip. Officers Peterson and Bryant giving their first public interview from prison. They were talking about their mistakes, about the bias they hadn't even recognized in themselves. They were actually apologizing. Later that evening, Marcus sat in his hotel room with Lisa and Thompson, looking out at the Washington Monument lit up against the night sky. Remember when we thought this was just about one wrongful arrest? Thompson asked, smiling. Lisa nodded. Now we're training departments in 3 countries. Even the old-timers are coming around. Yesterday, I heard Sergeant Miller, the one who used to hate all this reform stuff, telling a rookie about the importance of treating everyone with respect. Marcus's phone rang. It was Michael. Dad, you won't believe what happened today. Remember that kid Tommy, whose dad got arrested last year like you did? He just got accepted into the police academy. He says he wants to be part of the change. After the call, Marcus walked to the window. Below, he could see police cars patrolling the streets. But something was different now. People weren't crossing the street to avoid them. Parents weren't pulling their children closer. The fear was fading, replaced by something that looked a lot like trust. His final meeting the next morning was with the Attorney General. The Department of Justice wanted to use their reform model nationwide. As Marcus presented the program, he remembered something Michael had said months ago. Sometimes bad things happen to show us what needs to be fixed. Walking out of the Justice Department, Marcus passed a group of protesters, but these weren't anti-police protesters. Their signs read, "Support community policing and trust through training." Among them, he spotted former officers Peterson and Bryant's families, now advocates for police reform themselves. Back home, a few days later, Marcus drove down the street where he'd been arrested. A police car passed by, and the officer, one of their new recruits, waved. Marcus waved back, remembering how far they'd come. In his rearview mirror, he could see his own neighborhood, where it had all started. But ahead of him stretched roads leading everywhere, to all the places where this story of change needed to be told. The work wasn't finished. In many ways, it was just beginning. But now they knew it was possible. Sometimes Marcus thought, justice comes not from winning a fight, but from transforming it into something better.